Thousands. So we were talking about last week about how are you going to know that Jesus is the Messiah, and we're looking at texts from 700 years before he came. We looked at Isaiah 32, 33, 34, and 35. So you may see me kind of get into some of that. But in Isaiah 32, it says, "Behold, a king will reign in righteousness, and princes will rule in justice. Each will be like a hiding place from the wind, a covert from the tempest, like streams of water in a dry place, like the shade of a great rock in a weary land. Then the eyes of those who see will not be closed, and the ears of those who hear will hearken." And that's the part that I highlight. Then the eyes of those who see will not be closed, and the ears of those who hear will hearken. So Jesus is referencing several prophecies made by Isaiah and applying to themselves. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. That's in Isaiah 35, 5 and 6. So now we move forward to the New Testament, Matthew 9, 27 through 30. And it says, "As Jesus passed on from there, two blind men followed him, crying aloud, 'Have mercy on us, Son of David.'" So Jesus minding his own business. Somehow these people, he's walking, somehow these people have heard about him or know about him. They've heard something. So they're following him, and you can imagine they've got probably a cane because they're blind and they're trying to tap and everything else. And there's people around him so they can hear, and they're kind of following. But they're probably not talking very quietly. They're probably shouting because they don't know where he is, and they're trying to get his attention. And so really, I'm not going to do it, but you can just imagine just screaming at the top of your lungs, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And so then he went inside a house, and these guys figured out which house and everything. They come in, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" Now you realize at this time, Jesus has already taken flack from the religious leaders. They're doing their best to try to get rid of him. So he's being very careful. He knows everything he does. That is, everything he says, everything is being watched. And so these guys come to him and he says, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" In other words, he doesn't confront them with anything other than, "Do you have faith? Do you believe?" And they said to him, "Yes, Lord." And then he just touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, be it done to you." And their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." Because he knows there's danger. He doesn't do this out in the open with crowds. He does it in a house, and he's kind of like, "I don't know if I'm a friend or foe, but let's hope we're safe." And he does it, and he says, "Don't tell anybody." I think it's funny in this passage just because of human nature. If you want to get word out, just say it's a secret. But I don't know what Jesus' intentions was. I couldn't get into that, but that's probably a surefire way to get it out, to say, "Hey, don't tell anybody." But human nature is human nature, and those guys obviously didn't keep their mouths shut. And so then it says they went to Bethsaida, the pool, Mark 8, 20 through 25. And we recently talked about that because it's just a fascinating thing to think this guy is laying at this pool of Bethsaida, that an angel stirs it, and if you could get in the water right after that, you could be healed. And there's that whole deal. It's a fascinating deal. But it says they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and a beggar to him, and begged him to touch him. So this guy was blind and a beggar. Now, we know why the people were there. We know the other thing about this is this guy wasn't like the other two that, maybe walked together and had their canes or whatever they did, but this guy had somebody bring him. And why did he beg? Because he couldn't work, because he couldn't see. And so his life was just, turmoil. And he said, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now this passage Of all the passages in the Bible about Jesus' healing, this is the one that I would defend the most, to say that from what we know today, this one is not just somebody who, I could heal Carl. Carl could say he's got some affliction, and I could heal Carl, and we could make a big show, and it'd be great for TV and all this stuff. But Carl really didn't have the illness, and so, I could do that. This is one that's not anything close to that. In the first passage, those guys, everybody saw it, knew it, believed it, but even then somebody could say, well, maybe they're under his employ and maybe they're actors and maybe, I'm sure that you could watch them and say, yeah, they're really blind, because let's face it, you give me a cane and have me start walking, I'm going to just fall over everything. But blind folks do pretty good with it because that's the only way they know how to get around. Well, this guy comes to him, they bring him, and the guy says, touch me, I want to see. And he said, so there's a faith statement right there. He's come to Jesus and basically saying, I want to see. Well, it also says that this guy has been blind and blind since birth. So he's never had vision. These other guys could have had vision and lost it. They could have had some kind of eye infection. They could have had some kind of eye trauma. They could have had a lot of things. But this guy, he's been a beggar and everything else. He has no family supports. He's been, And it says he took the guy out of the village, and he basically spit in his eyes. We've got, and I don't know if this is the passage. There's a passage where he spits and takes clay and rubs it over people's eyes. He does weird things to give the sight back. It's really cool. It's not a one-size-fits-all. He does some really cool stuff. But Jesus says, you want to see? Bing! You can see. Now, for most of us, we say, okay, there it was. He gave him sight. And you could argue that he fixed the eyes, because now the guy sees. But he asked the guy, he said, do you see? Did I give you what you wanted? And the guy says, yes. But it actually, from what we know today, from giving sight to someone who has never seen it, and we know this in so many ways, and you do too, is that vision is not just about the eyes, not just about the things that see, not just about the lenses. Vision's about the computer, the brain. Have you ever looked at something and go, doesn't look right? Like, have you ever seen a mirage? You think you see something that's not there, but your brain says it's not there, but you know. Vision is a complex thing that interacts not with just what we get from sense, but then our brain has to interpret it. You go to the doctor and get your eyes dilated and nothing looks right. It takes a little while to adjust to that. Well, they've had studies about people who've been given their sight as adults when they were blind as children. And it's incredible how many of them commit suicide. Because, I've struggled with this. I don't really know the whole answer. But having sight could disturb you in many ways. One is that, Carl and I were talking about my grandbaby. My grandbaby has sight, and she does things. Right now, if I throw stuff at her, probably going to hit her. But over time, she'll get where she can catch or dodge, do whatever. That takes learning. These people are now adults, and their world is moving. And all these things they didn't see as threats now are threats. If you're blind crossing the street, you don't see how big that car is that could run over you, or the one that missed you or whatever. You may hear them, but you never saw it. And so there's also that, it's one of those things that, if you throw a person who just got their sight, they get hit almost every time until they realize, hey, that's going to hurt. I need to do something. I need to move. And then the other thing that they have, their brain, their computer has to work on is depth. How far is that? Because you could imagine seeing something coming and go, oh my gosh, it's a train, it's going to kill me. But opposed to our eyes know to look and see, how fast is it getting bigger? How much is it changing? We do all those things with our computer, not our eyes. The other thing that I wonder about with people that get their sight is, there are parts of our world that's a pretty place, but there are parts of our world that is very ugly. And if you had to see the things that, you hadn't seen before. The sin, the evil, I can just go on and on. You know, there are things that you thought were fine, and now you go, oh, that's hideous. You know what I'm saying? You see stuff you probably didn't want to see. But, so Jesus said, do you see? And the guy said, yeah, I see people. So he knew what people were. You know, he had touched people. He was a people. And then he says, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Well, does a blind guy know what a tree is? Yeah, you can touch them. Do you feel them? Do you feel the leaves? Do you hear the wind? There's motion, you know. So he's using something that he can relate in his world from being blind, and he says they're like these trees. They're trees, but I've heard this term walking. It's like these trees that are moving. And, you know, and a tree does all kinds of stuff. Human beings can do all kinds of stuff. But Jesus is giving the guy what he wants. And Jesus says, then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now, from 2,000 years ago, they didn't say his vision wasn't clear the first time. They just said he saw everything, sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. I told you, sight is two things, not just the camera, but the computer. And so Jesus knew this guy was going to be very uncomfortable, troubled, and everything, by giving him what he asked for. So Jesus touches him the second time to give him what he needs. He fixes the computer. And now the guy's like, oh, I know how to interpret these. My computer works. It's a different world now. And so we know these things 2,000 years later because we can't fix the computer. We can fix the eyes sometimes. People give sight back. Ophthalmologists can do that. But we can't fix the brain, the computer. Jesus did it. So in other words, Jesus understood more about that than we would have, 100 years ago. But now that we can fix them, now we deal with this whole thing of this trauma these people have. Jesus fixed it. That's why I'm saying that's the passage to me that says the writers back then had no clue of what they were really seeing and didn't know how to interpret and write it, but they just wrote what they observed. Okay. And here's another one. It says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciple asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Isn't it funny that we try to put those things on the people that have the afflictions instead of putting it on the reality that we live in a fallen world and this stuff's going to happen because we're not in the perfect place? But his disciples are trying to say, who's guilty? Need you to judge here. Jesus said it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. In other words, he's saying, Adam failed. Adam, messed up. Our world has fallen. That's the world we live in. But guess what? He gives me the chance to show off. Not that he would say it that way, but he gives me the chance to make it right. I'm here to fix this cosmos. That's my job. But the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no man can work. And so he said, it's my time. I'm supposed to be doing this stuff. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, that's another thing that I think that we like to use. How many times do you talk about vision and being light or candles or cameras or all these things that we talk about that involve light? Seeing has something that kind of does with that, because we all know too, if you get in a totally dark room, how good is that? You can't see at all. And so there's a funny play on words, I think, with this whole deal that Jesus is having fun with the way he's wording it, that I am the light of the world. I'm going to give this guy light. I'm going to open up his camera. It's going to work. I'm supposed to work in the day. Can't work at night. Can't see. Okay. But he's not talking about just here and now. He's talking about eternity. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud. Now, this is where, it kind of is funny because I really think we're not talking he just smeared it over his eyelids. I think Jesus took spit and mud, opened the guy's eyes, and rubbed it inside. Ooh, don't you know that didn't feel too good either? But he did it. And then he said, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And so the guy could have said, nah. Because the guy couldn't see at that point. Jesus had done this thing to him, but he couldn't see still. And I've been, this is even more fun. I've been to the place where this story was to have happened, because when you get up in this passage, he's at the temple. The temple's up on the hill. Probably from here, it's probably half the distance to VA, to the Pool of Siloam. It's downhill. That's the good part. It is downhill. But it's a pretty good hike down there. So here's a guy with mud in his eye. Like, I don't know if you've had people talk about drinking, but here's mud in your eye. Well, this guy's got mud in his eye, and he has to go because he tells him to do it. Now, he could have just said, hey, you got any water? Let's wash this out up, and stayed blind. But he believed him. And so he went down, and he walked to this Pool of Siloam and washed his eyes out, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I can see. Now, this guy, I guess, didn't have the problem with the brain or whatever, and he was probably fine, but who knows? Now, how did he fix his computer too? I don't know. But this story is kind of, he made the guy, and I think that's another thing that's kind of troublesome in some way to me, is why didn't he just, boom, and fix this guy? But instead he said, look, you're going to have to work. You got part of this too. We're partners in this business. You're going to go down there, and then we're going to be, you're going to be good. So you got what I'm saying is we got 3 different miracles about sight, and they're different. And so I guess it's not one size fits all, but Jesus had things to do for them and teach them. And the first guy just says, I want to see, and Jesus is like, do you know what sight really is? Do you know what it really means? Is it just the eyes, or is it the brain, or both? And on this one, don't know what happened here. But I don't think that Jesus did bad things to this guy either. I think that probably when he was, he was good. But and it said, back to our initial 32, number 4, the mind of the rash will have good judgment, and the tongue of the stammerers will speak readily and distinctly. Now, there's a lot of problems with speech, a lot of things that go with speech. We find kids that have speech problems. Do they have hearing problems? Do they have problems with their tongue? Their tongue may be anchored at the bottom, and they need that fixed. Speech is also a very complicated process. That's why babies don't just start speaking. It's amazing what the 16-month-old can do with me. But I listen to her. I know what she wants, and she can even look at me and say, you didn't listen. Because no, you can't have what you want. Grandpa's going to protect you from what you want, even though you want it, because I can tell you that's what you want, but you're not having that. But she'll look at me like, oh, you're not giving me what I want. So it says, they brought to him a deaf man who also had a speech difficulty. Oh, I didn't mean to put that way, but yeah. Told you, sometimes hearing and speech can be related. Oh. And begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. So he took him away from the crowd privately. After putting the finger, this is one of my favorite passages too. I have to put the mic down. After putting his fingers in the man's ears, and then he touched his tongue, then he sighed deeply and said to him, Ephphatha. Ephphatha, that means open, like open the door, be opened. And it said immediately his ears were open. In other words, the guy could hear. His speech difficulty was removed. And he began to speak clearly. Then he ordered them to tell no one. But the more he would order them, the more they would proclaim it. And so back in 35, moving, Isaiah 35, 5 and 6, it says, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be opened. And then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy." Before I leave this back, I also want to step back up to Ephphatha. I don't know about you, but if I'm going to say that word and not spit on Carl, I'm going to have to swallow good. Because Ephphatha has a lot of those things that start sending it out, So it's kind of funny. He says he touched his tongue, the spit, the whole environment. He's close enough to the guy. He's like this, Ephphatha. So that would make great movies, but you'd have to interpret it too. So whatever. But I love that image. Okay, so 35. John 5, moving New Testament. Sometime later, there was a religious gathering of the Jews. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, there's a pool with 5 porches called Bethesda near the sheep gate. Inside these porches lay many sick people. Some were blind, some could not walk, some could not move their bodies. And this goes to the whole thing of an angel of the Lord came at certain times and made the water move. And the other thing I'll tell you is I don't think that Jesus went to this place just once. It's in a city. I think he probably went there multiple times. So, but this is where this parentheses, fortunately at some point in history, this was not in the original text. It said some could not move their bodies, and it would have gone from there. But somebody started taking that and writing into the text of what was going on. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. And that's why it's in parentheses, and that's why your Bible sometimes has funny things about this section. An angel of the Lord came at certain times and made the water move. All of them were waiting for it to move. Whoever got in the water first after it was moving was healed of whatever sickness he had. Well, a man who was sick, was there, had been sick for 38 years. Jesus saw him lying there and knew the man had been sick a long time. Jesus said to him, "Would you like to be healed?" The sick man said, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is moving. While I am coming, another one gets in first. And my life is I lose. Can't get there fast enough and I lose." Now, this guy, I don't know what he had. One thing that he could have had pretty easily would be something like spina bifida, where the spinal cord doesn't work right and people can't use their legs and they're born that way. And, it's something that I do know that there are groups of pediatricians and neurosurgeons and that sort of stuff, and they're doing things with this condition in utero through scopes. So this is one of those things that if we figure it out early enough, we maybe actually protect them. Now, it's an imprecise thing. We're not, it's a new technology, but they're doing it. And so maybe that was it. So he could use his arms, he could drag himself, but his legs didn't work. If that's what it is. I'm interpreting. Just say, you want to burn me at the stake? Fine. But I'm just saying that's what I kind of see here. Because the guy obviously could get around some. He could move some, but he said, "I can't move fast enough." "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is moving. While I'm coming, another one gets in first." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your bed and walk." That seems kind of calloused and cold and mean. That's the kind of stuff that you say to somebody because you know they can't, right? That's not what Jesus was doing. At once the man was healed. He picked up his bed and walked away. This happened on the day of rest. Now Jesus is in trouble again because he's not supposed to do stuff on the Sabbath. But it's a great passage. So Isaiah 35, "Then the lame shall leap like deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy." The Jews said to the man, I forgot I did not have this, still had this section. The Jews said to the man who'd been healed, "This is the day of rest. It is against the law for you to carry your bed." Now they'd really like to go back to Jesus and say it's against the law for you to say you're Jesus and say you're the Son of God and do miracles. But he said to them, "The man who healed me said to me, 'Pick up your bed and walk.'" Am I going to listen to you? Or am I going to listen to him? Because he gave me something none of you guys can give me. I can walk. And so am I going to listen to him or you? Well, he's thinking. Then the Jews asked him, "What man said to you, 'Pick up your bed and walk'?" The man who had been healed did not know who he was. Jesus had gone away where many people were there. I think the other thing, sometimes Jesus does things and blends into the crowd. You know, I thought that was wonderful. Later, Jesus found the man who had been healed in the house of God. He said to him, "Listen, you've been healed. Stop sinning or something worse will come to you." The man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who had healed him. Now he knows who it was. Didn't know then. So the Jews wanted to kill him because Jesus did these things on the day of the rest. Jews made it very hard for him. Jesus said to them, "My Father's still working all the time, so I'm working also." The Jews tried all the more to kill him, not only because he had worked on the day of rest, but because he had also called God his own Father. This made him the same as God. We understand that. They didn't. Or they were threatened. You know, Jesus threatens the status quo. Jesus threatens the status quo anytime he comes into our world. Jesus heals a man let down through the roof of a house. On one of the days while Jesus was teaching, some proud religious law keepers and teachers of the law were sitting by him. You know, don't you think those religious people wanted the best seat? Hey, can I get, okay, you outrank me. Can I sit next, they all wanted the best seat. So they wanted, it's like, hey, I want to sit next to my superhero. Okay. But some of them were skeptical and whatever, so you got to worry about even who you're sitting there. Their purposes may be good and they may not be. They had come from every town in the countries of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. The power of the Lord was there to heal them. Some men took a man who was not able to move his body to Jesus. He was carried on a bed. They looked for a way to take the man into the house where Jesus was. Now, the way that I understand this story is that the roof must have been something like thatch or something, because the walls could have been stone, the walls could have been clay, whatever. But the roof had to be something lightweight that got the water off. And so I'm kind of imagining it would be, sticks, trees, thatch with, straw, something. Straw house kind of comes to mind. But they could not find a way to take him in because of so many people. You can just imagine if we're in this room and somebody really important was here, they'd be at the doors, they'd be at, we'd have, Jesus would be standing here and there'd be very, very little space. They'd be all over the place. But they could not find a way to take him in because of so many people. They made a hole in the roof over where Jesus stood. Then they let the bed with the sick man on it down before Jesus. So not only did they make a hole in the roof, they made a 6 foot wide by about 3 foot wide hole. Jesus is trying to talk and people are sitting there and all of a sudden stuff starts falling on your head. Like, what is going on? Kind of stops all conversation. And these guys are, gung-ho. They brought their friend. And so then they let him down, through ropes. They just let him down on it before Jesus. You notice it says they didn't say anything. They just got him to Jesus. They didn't ask him. They didn't beg him. It just says they just got him through the roof and got him to Jesus. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." Oh my gosh, there he goes doing religious things again. Teachers of the law and the proud religious laws keys thought to them, "Who is this man who speaks as if he is God? Who can forgive sins but God only?" Jesus knew what he were thinking. He said to them, "Why do you think this way in your hearts? Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or get up and go walk?" They're still thinking on that one, right? "So that you may know that the Son of Man has the right and the power and the on earth to forgive sins," he said to the man who could not move his body. And he's real. He's not touching him. He's talking to him. They could say, okay, this is some kind of trick. What did he do? He said to the man who could not move his body, "I say to you, get up, take your bed, and go to your home." And once the sick man got up in front of them, took his bed, and went to his home, thanking God. Back to the verse of singing songs. "And the lame shall leap like deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy." All those who there were surprised and gave thanks to God, saying, "We have seen very special things today." Then Jesus, and this is verse 20, I'm not sure which one this is, but anyway. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns in which most of his miracles had been performed because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, these unbelievers, these out there, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. For you, Capernaum, will be lifted to the heavens. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted to the heavens? No, you'll go down to Hades or hell or Sheol. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you, there's more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. You're seeing it, you're experiencing it, and you're still being deniers. At the time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So, how do we know Jesus is the Messiah? Well, we're going to do a little more work here. Because Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus showed up on the scene, had these verses, and I've given you them. I've shown you that Jesus is capable of doing everything that they mention. Well, Jesus' cousin John the Baptist is in prison. And after Jesus finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in the towns of Galilee, all around around the lake. When John was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one is to come, or should we expect someone else? Which is a good statement, an interesting statement. You remember John knew Jesus before they were born. Mary tells Elizabeth, and John the Baptist jumps inside her womb. They're cousins. They knew each other. But the interesting thing is, John was everything, all that. I mean, John was an amazing person amongst himself, calling for people to repent. But he's asking his cousin through these people, he said, are you the Messiah? Are you the one that we've been waiting for 700 years? Or should we expect somebody else? Jesus replied, and he told John's disciples, go back and report to John what you hear and see. So here's Jesus' argument about why he is the Messiah. The blind receive sight. The lame walk. Oh, I didn't go into the leprosy. Those who have leprosy are healed. Remember the story of the 10 lepers. He heals them all and says, go to this priest and make sure that you're healed. Even though he knew they were healed, but he's like, let's do the formal, let's do the right thing, let's do it all by the book, go get so they did that. Are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised. I didn't get into that, but we could have. The good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No. Those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes. So Jesus is now telling them John the Baptist was all that. Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet, this is the one about whom is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before him. So he's telling them, hey, there was a road sign back there that you guys drove past, the one about I'll send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare my way before you. That was John the Baptist. That's my cousin. And then he's telling told John, so truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subject to violence, and violent people have been raiding it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Funny he's using that term. Just got this guy's hearing back. So To what can I compare this generation? There are children sitting in the marketplaces and calling out to others. We played the pipe for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by their deeds. So, how did we know he was the Messiah? Well, he did all this stuff. Now, there is that passage, and I should have pulled it out, but there is that passage about the false prophets and saying he's healing in Jesus' name, and it was working. The problem is he wasn't in Jesus' team, but he was using Jesus' name to heal people. And then he got found out and bad things happened, but, So I think that's step one, is how do we know that Jesus was the Messiah? He did all the things that Isaiah talked about. And he did them multiple different ways. And it didn't seem like a big deal to him. And there's one passage in there that I've even been working on a kind of song. I want to at some point put it all together. But and the even thing that even gets better is you kind of sit there and say, okay, he can speak it into, he can touch, he can use his spit, he can do all these, he can do these miracles. But he also can take a woman who's walking through, it's in a crowd and knows that Jesus is there, and she wants to be healed and she has the faith, and so she just wants to get close enough to touch his clothes, to touch his robe, to touch his sleeve, to touch his, just wanted to touch. That was her faith. And Jesus knew she touched him. Now, with all these people around, the disciples were like, Jesus stopped the whole procession. He said, who touched me? And the disciples think that's a crazy question. Master, there's people all over the place. We're doing body interference just to try to get you through the crowd. You're asking who touched you? And he found out, and he knew who it was. But she was healed, and that's all it took. She just had to touch his clothes. For those guys who were thinking, well, maybe there's some magic, some miracles, maybe there's something they're pulling off here. Maybe they've got a bunch of actors. Who knows? If they still didn't want to believe, that's still an amazing one that all you do is touch the clothes. So I think that now we've got to look forward, and we'll do this the next time. In the end days, how are we going to know he's the Messiah? I'll let you think about that. Anyway, let's do communion, so Carl doesn't let me forget. Back when my son was in Germany after college, he had German, he had no Hebrew, and he traveled to one of the Holocaust memorials, and somewhere at this memorial, and I'm not sure where it was in Europe, but there was a black stone with the word Zakar on it, and it's Hebrew. He said, "Dad, what does this say?" And he went on. But he took a picture, and he actually had somebody take his picture with him in it, which I really loved. He proved he was there, and this is what he wanted to know. And so Carl and I were talking about Hebrew language, and I had to look it up. It's not a word that I, at the time, really knew real well, obviously. And so I looked it up. And Zakar means remember. And so that is one of the themes for the people of Israel is remember the Holocaust, remember the things that happened, don't forget. Because otherwise it could happen to a different people, it could happen again. Remember. I am struck when I go through this study that the people that the Bible was in Hebrew or Aramaic, and the Bible was given to them, and they had all this Isaiah stuff, and they had Jesus come amongst them, and they didn't remember. And so they didn't believe that was him. And so I find that sad for me to them, because they're still waiting for this Messiah. And so I guess in the way that we kind of word it is, Jesus' second coming will be there first. But the world still waits. But Jesus, this guy who came and did all these things and proved that their scripture, he met the... I mean, like if you were a biblical scholar, like these people who kept trying to persecute him and ended up getting him killed, if they had their checklist from Isaiah, they go, done, 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 done. And all that would say, wait a minute, do we have any witnesses? Check, check, check. But they still didn't want to believe that it was him. He was right there. One of the cool things that they talk about, and for some reason I'm blanking on the word, but there's a concept called a touchstone in the Bible. It's blanking on my brain right now, but touchstone. Not a cornerstone, but a touchstone. And a touchstone is a way that you can actually have something that's permanent, like that word zakar on that stone. It's a touchstone. Jesus says about himself, I am the touchstone. You can touch me and you're touching God. I am. He tells them that. I'm blanking on it's in a passage in there. Maybe I'll bring that back next time. But Jesus gets up in the upper room with the disciples after he's been crucified. And you realize that when he came back, even his disciples who lived with him daily had said, well, it's all for naught. We had fun. We really liked him. He was great. But he's gone. And so many of them went back to fishing. They didn't do the evangelistic stuff. They didn't tell everybody that Jesus has been here. So Jesus is in their upper room now. He's got holes in his fingers. He's got a hole in his side. Thomas proves all that. And so he says, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance. It was a car of me. He said, after that, he took the cup. He said, this is my blood, which has been shed for you. Take in remembrance of me. So remember, and we'll get into the new stuff later. It's going to get a little hairy because we're going to get into Revelation and all that kind of stuff. But thank you, New Day. Carl, would you close us?
Just praise God that Doc gave us the word this morning. Pray that everybody's family is doing well today. Have a great week. I'll be blessed. In Jesus' wonderful and holy name, amen.